Hi, and welcome to Tech Talk with Scotty Antonio. I'm here with my Mexican tech bro Tonio, co-host, other co-host, inanimate co-host Cletus, and of course, right. So the Linux world is in a bit of shock recently because there have been, I think the grand total is now like 8 major vulnerabilities. Well, 2 or 3 really severe ones. And this is pretty interesting because Linux is historically regarded as like the most secure operating system. Various flavors of Linux are used for pretty much all the servers out there. Some of the details, I'm like, we'll try not to go into too much detail because it gets hairy. So uh, let's jump in. So the first Linux vulnerability that you probably heard about was copy fail. Now, all right. First of all, we explain you've got the internet, and the internet has servers, and those servers are hosted at a hosting company. And on each server, you have a root user. So a root user is like God on that server. You can do anything you want, right? Each server also has individual users. They usually have what we usually call a hosting account. So, like if I want to host ScottiesTech.Info, I will get hosting on one of these servers, but I'm not the root user. I'm just kind of like a local user. I only have access to my website and my stuff. I don't have access to everybody else's stuff. And this is just pretty much how, more or less, how servers and the internet work, at least in terms of web hosting. So the reason this copy fail was kind of a big deal, um, without going into all the gory technical details, because it gets pretty hairy, is basically well, first of all, let's use an analogy because I like analogies. So you have a hosting company, which is like a country. And in that hosting company, you have multiple servers. So that would be the cities in your country. And then at each hosting company, they have multiple servers. So the servers would be like individual properties inside the city. So, for example, you could have residential properties, houses, apartments. You could have commercial properties like businesses, right? Each of those is, say, a website in our on our server, our city, at our hosting company, the country. Simple enough, right? So, copy fail is the kind of vulnerability where you have to have access to some property. You have to own a property in the city in order to use the exploit. Now, the exploit is like, you just think of it as like magic. And then, so let's say I have a house in Happyville. Because I have an account, a property in Happyville, I could actually execute this exploit, and the hundreds or thousands of other websites in on that server in my city of Happyville, uh, it's sort of like the world's my oyster. Like if I use that exploit, I can walk into other people's houses and just steal their stuff. I can raid your refrigerator. I could go into a business and take anything I wanted. I own everything. I could waltz into the mayor's office and say, "Bro, you're fired. I'm the new mayor." I literally become like God of Happyville, right? But the key point here is that for copy fail to work, I have to actually be a resident of Happyville. So, and that's why you probably heard people talking about copy fail, and they say, well, it's a root exploit. In other words, you have God powers, but you already have to have an account on the server that you're trying to compromise. So that's pretty bad, actually, like really bad. But it's not as bad as the exploit that came after that one. So the next exploit that happened was one in cPanel. And this one, you don't even have to have an address in Happyville. You don't have to have a hosting account. It's sort of like you could walk up to Happyville, to like the gates of Happyville, and there's a sign there that says, "Welcome to Happyville." And it's like you could use your exploit, which is like I don't know, like you have a magic banana and you just chuck your magic banana at the welcome to Happyville sign, and boom, you own Happyville. It's yours. And any other server, any other city out there that's using cPanel, you could just go next door to, you know, Snazzy Town. Same thing. If they're cPanel, chuck your magic banana at the welcome to Happyville sign, you own it. So the cPanel vulnerability was like, it was pretty much like, oh my freaking God, this is really, really bad. The cPanel people have to be feeling really, really, really dumb, because you could just sort of craft this magic payload and send it, and you don't even need to have an account. You can, I think they said something like, at first I heard 1.5 million servers were compromised, including one I run, as a matter of fact, even though it was patched, which is the other interesting thing about that vulnerability is my server was patched. I run it. It was patched against this vulnerability. It didn't matter. So, right, what exactly happened there? That's another question. But then this all happened last week, and of course there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. Everything is fine. Patch is released. All is well. That was last week. Then this past Friday, I woke up in the morning and I had several instant messages from friends and colleagues saying, oh my God, there's this thing called Dirty Frag. So, where's our devastating Dirty Frag exploit leaks out? Gives immediate root access on most Linux machines since 2017. No patches available, no warning given. Copy fail-like vulnerability had its embargo broken. So, okay, the way this normally works is you have this thing called a CVE, which stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. It's a system run by, I think, the Office of Homeland Security and the Meter Corporation, and all it is if you see a CVE number, this is kind of like a catalog of vulnerabilities in software. And so what normally happens is they don't publish the CVE with the exploit until a patch is available, because it's kind of dumb if you actually put a vulnerability on the internet and you tell people how to hack websites. Of course, that's the first thing they're going to do. Like within less than an hour, all these sites are going to be hacked. In this case, the plan was to quietly discuss the vulnerability, patch it, and then like a few weeks or months down the road, announce it. Here's the CVE, make it public. Patches are already available. You're already safe. And Bob is everyone's uncle. But unfortunately, someone decided to leak it early. Now, fortunately, there was a way to mitigate this attack. You can protect yourself, which of course I did instantly. 5 minutes after that, I got an email again from cPanel saying there are 3 more vulnerabilities in our software. And I nearly fell off my chair at this point. And they said, here's a way to mitigate that. Okay, so I did that. And they said, we'll release a patch in 10 hours. They did in 8 hours. But the curious thing about this is that the 3 extra flaws in cPanel, when they finally released the official CVEs and I was able to read what they weren't really that critical, in my opinion. So I think that was just because cPanel got burned so bad by the one last week that they're being extra cautious, which, that's admirable. But the even more confusing thing was that this Dirty Frag, which is like copy fail, where you just throw your magic banana at the sign and you walk right through the city gates and own the place, that one was given a CVE rating of only important, not critical. Now, maybe I'm crazy, but any flaw that allows you to take over a server, like any server that runs pretty much any flavor of Linux within the past 9 years, simply by throwing a magic banana at the welcome sign, to me, that's pretty critical.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Does that sound critical to you?
Oh, as critical as it gets, right? I mean, just root access, that is just to, as you were saying, just having the keys to the whole city
Yeah.
and just doing whatever you want, regardless of any other security measures that they may have. So
Yeah.
it's kind of bonkers. At the same time, I just keep thinking, Scotty, all of this is AI driven, meaning that these vulnerabilities may be resulting from AI, just punching through some of the code bases, meaning that at least Linux, of course, is open source, and you can actually just go and see what's going on and look at the code if you want. And then just these rogue, I guess, AIs, or maybe not even rogue, just they have instructions on finding vulnerabilities. And as we are seeing more and more models, more sophisticated ones, then it kind of makes sense if that's what happened, right?
Yeah. The other thing I'm wondering is it because there have been several stories about we're using AI to find, but who was it?
Mozilla.
Mozilla. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mozilla found all sorts of bugs in Firefox, and they're like, bros, don't worry. We got all these suckers patched. We used AI. The interesting thing about that story is that Mozilla, as I understand it, is particularly successful at using AI because they did something very specific. They used AI in a very particular and clever way, whereas most people out there using AI to find holes and security, bugs and that sort of thing, are not necessarily doing it in an intelligent way. So there's that side where AI is punching holes, and then there's the flip side where people are using AI more and more to actually write code.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of a vulnerability that's been around for 9 years, that's obviously not the fault of AI being used to do coding. But one of my fears, I guess you could say, is that as more companies are doing AI coding more and more, that we're going to have a lot more vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And then they're going to use AI to try to catch the vulnerabilities. And if they don't do it smartly, like Mozilla did, they're not going to find them. So, yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
AI.
It's a race. It's a race now. I mean, just a couple of years ago, we had, all right, we have this team, very intelligent people, of course, and they are all writing code and making sure that it's secure and it's critical infrastructure in some cases, and they have to choose wisely their tools and all of that.
Yeah.
Now, what we have is, the rise of vibe coding, which is just instructing the AI to do something for you, create an app. A typical example will be, I don't know, create an Uber-like app because, I don't know, for some reason I want to. So it is simple in the sense of just writing a few lines, but behind the scenes can become super complex. So with complexity, of course, the AI needs to hold more information just to understand well, I'm not even sure if it's understand the word it should be using, but just to have the context, because that's how AI works. It gathers context and then evaluates and performs an instruction. Then, so as the code base, grows bigger and bigger, the AI needs to hold more context of your program, and with that, hallucinations creep in. So with that, maybe, and remember that you want all of this in seconds, preferably. So how can anything be done within seconds and also be super secure? I mean, it's kind of,
especially when AI is doing a lot of coding based on past coding. And I'm not sure if most people realize this, but there are security holes in literally everything. And that's actually probably another thing we should mention is like some of these severe Linux bugs that would give you root access to a server. They were around for like 9 years. Now that means they know that because like you can look at, you see the flaw and then you can kind of trace back the code through the code history and you go, there was this commit in 2017 or whatever, and that's when we changed this line of code. That's where the vulnerability came from. Okay, so, but what that means is that for the past 9 years, there was quite literally a gaping hole in like every flavor and version of Linux out there. And I mean, if you think that like they just discovered it now, well, okay, bad stuff happened, that was bad enough. But then I think of things like, Ed Snowden's revelations and intel agencies, and one of the things that they do is they try to find vulnerabilities in software. So did they know that this vulnerability existed 9 years ago? Because they're poring over code to find these things. If they did, how hard is it for them you're hosting a website on some server, they go in and they get root access. They don't do ransomware and encrypt the whole server. They don't do, try to steal credit card information, because that isn't their goal. Their goal is to spy on you, as hopefully because you're evil and bad, but right. And they can insert whatever they want, and they can BCC all your emails. They can send notifications every time you do something. They can insert their own code surreptitiously and hide it very, very well. And for 9 years, you'd have no idea. In fact, it could still be running on your server and you'd never know. And that is how they get in. And of course, there are many malicious actors out there who they want to know these things. So when one of the allegedly most secure operating systems, or Linux is a sort of a group of operating systems, is revealed to have these like really nasty giant holes in it, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence in things like privacy and overall security.
Yeah. So totally in agreement. I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking this vulnerability, as it is known right now, maybe, is the worst situation for an intelligence, because perhaps they already knew about it, they were exploiting it, without any restriction and without anyone knowing, and they were pretty much, it was part of their tooling, right? What else we can do? Oh, we can exploit that vulnerability. And now that it is known, well, that door is closed. Of course, more could be out there. I mean, that is always a theme, meaning that one door gets closed, but then maybe a window gets opened, so that means that there are more things. As these are big code bases, these are huge, millions of lines of code are written to sustain these Linux servers. So perhaps it's just a matter of time before we have a new one. Or maybe it's just that this one for some reason had an expiration date, meaning that, all right, we can get rid of, we don't really need this one anymore. So some sort of situation around that. But nonetheless, a bad day for intelligence is perhaps. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that these flaws are more in kind of like the core of Linux, like getting down to the kernel of Linux. The kernel of Linux is literally like the kernel, like the core of it. Yeah. You can also use vulnerabilities like, for example, on a Windows machine. Back in the days of Windows XP, one of the things that people were complaining about was the security was like absolute garbage. Nowadays, we have Windows 10 and Windows 11, and the security is actually pretty good, surprisingly enough. It's just the update system that sucks horribly and crashes your computer all the time, and so they haven't gotten that part right. But as we know, especially if you're a Windows user, if you have any other piece of software that it has a flaw in it, you can use those flaws to get full access to the system. So here we're talking about like flaws in the core of the operating system. But as with like a Windows PC at home, Linux servers have all kinds of software that you run. You've got the core operating system. In the case of cPanel, you've got Linux running on the server, and then WHM on top of that, more or less, and then cPanel kind of running on top of that. And then you have all sorts of add-ons and other pieces of software like, fail to ban and caching systems and all kinds of different software. And if any one of those pieces of software has some horrible flaw in it, so when you look at like the whole attack footprint of any server running any operating system, the potential for security holes it's just massive. So yeah, it's probably a bad day for intelligence agencies, but they've probably got about 1,000 or 2,000 more.
Yeah, maybe. Exactly. I mean, it's just like, you're a knight and you have your, iron armor, but your butt is completely exposed. So
Yeah,
it doesn't
that's
really
actually,
matter if you have the finest iron,
yeah,
in your arms, but if your butt is still exposed, well, you are, well, not going to win the
yeah.
battle.
Or like they say, a chink in the armor, because like you've got a plate here and a plate here, but you're vulnerable like right there.
Yeah.
And if you get a yeah, so and I'm not sure. I mean, I mentioned Windows 11, and on the security front, I don't know. My take is if you have a Windows machine, get Malwarebytes, malwarebytes.com. You have to pay for it. I don't have an affiliate link, or this isn't, we're not making any money off of recommending Malwarebytes. But I've been using it for years, and like it gets all the baddies, and I'm happy. Um, if you have Linux, you obviously also need something. These recent vulnerabilities have highlighted that pretty well. And as for the Mac OS, I'm actually wondering what's going to happen, because now that they have this MacBook Neo that's very affordable, and now that it appears that Apple is actually getting into the affordable computing market, the sort of attack surface is going to become like way, way bigger than it is before. If those machines sell well, well, everyone will be happy because they'll all be using Mac OS instead of Windows 11. But that means that, when 50% of the PC market is Mac OS and not, Windows 11, like whatever the number is, your number one target becomes what people are using the most.
Yeah.
So does that mean we're going to start seeing more vulnerabilities in Mac OS too?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, last time we were talking about this MacBook Neo thing, and it was a great idea. I mean, but at the same time, it can be a problem, right? Because of what you just mentioned. But now more people are going to start using this. How much? How many more? Not really sure. Maybe it will not even come close to the dominance that Windows has. Maybe it will be. Maybe it's just the start of a strategy for Apple. I mean, who knows what the future holds? But more people are going to consider the Neo for sure, and that will, it potentially, at least as of now, is a potential problem because of security. Of course, we don't really hear much about viruses or hacks around the Mac, although they do exist, of course.
Yeah.
And they've been hacking the iCloud servers, and they've been doing this and that, along the years. But some security related, critical type of flaw we haven't heard just yet. But at the same time, it is interesting that if Apple goes this route, it's because we've been hearing more and more about how Windows 11, even though it's more secure, as you were mentioning, the usability of the product is not quite good as it was. So maybe they are just capitalizing on that. I mean, you have ads on your taskbar. I mean, that for me is like a deal breaker. I don't really want to see, you hit the start button and then you have your whatever it's called, and then you have ads right there, and it is just so ubiquitous right now that it makes, at least from my perspective, makes the product less appealing. and then along comes Apple and makes a sweet deal, and then why not, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. But I'm not sure why. I'm not exactly sure why now, but I do find it interesting that at this exact moment in time, when there are so many other crazy things going on in the world, you suddenly have this like 8-day period of like these just insane vulnerabilities in Linux.
Yeah.
And I mean, the response time for some of them was very, very good. And for others, it was like, what are you people smoking? So obviously, some people were taken pretty off guard. And then this gives kind of the illusion of security and superiority to users of other systems. But as you mentioned, like there have been vulnerabilities for Mac OS or Safari, and some of them are just as bad as in like ones that you used to have in Windows, or you still do sometimes. I mean, even web browsers like Chrome have CVE notifications, and they patch it, and so I guess that's maybe what helpful advice do we have for people to help them stay safe? I mean, I mentioned for Windows 11, just get Malwarebytes and install it. If you have some other antivirus, anti-malware system that you like, stick with it. Just make sure you use it. Make sure you keep it up to date. And I would add, keep everything up to date. I know a lot of people who say like, no, I don't want updates because they're just going to spy on me more. Yeah, that may be true, but your job is to update anyway, because you do want those security patches no matter what operating system you're using. And then it's your job, if you don't want the annoying spying, to read about it and learn about it and turn all the annoying spying stuff off, which like Tonio, you mentioned the ads. I turned all that stuff off in Windows, so like I don't have anything bothering me. And that might actually be a good short.
Help us, Scotty. I mean, help us with that and telemetry as well.
Look, what do you do for your Mac? Like, do you?
Well, I'm a Mac user. Quite honestly, just keep up with the updates, and sometimes I don't even do that. But I don't really. I mean, the common sense stuff, right? I mean, it's super easy for me. I mean, I receive spam all the time, and that's one of the criticisms I have for the mail application in Mac OS. It's not really that great filtering out the spam messages. So that's that. And then, of course, if I fail and I just may click on something, I mean, the thing is that, you can have a vulnerability. Of course it is, you don't really want to have, click on these spam messages that promise you an iPhone 17 for free. And they have, I don't know.
That's probably not true. You're
probably not true. But, my main concern is to just avoid these subtle attacks and just be alert on what I'm doing with my email. I guess that is my main thing. I'm not really sure if all the vulnerabilities around Chromium, the underlying system that, uses, that Chrome is built on, and also I think Safari now is built upon. I don't know if, depending on the system, the vulnerabilities may be different. Maybe if it's on a Mac OS system, it's not the same as with Windows. I'm not really sure, but regardless, it may be. So the thing is, if I click on something and then my browser gets compromised, perhaps, then it's going to be a problem, regardless of the operating system that you're working with. So
that's actually a lot of the vulnerabilities on Macs were for primarily Safari. They were kind of like web exploits, and it kind of makes sense, because if you get like a phishing email or something, and it takes you to some website that downloads a vulnerability for Windows, which is the most common operating system, well, that doesn't matter because you've got a Mac, you know.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
Yeah, so preferably use some kind of security software, and definitely keep everything up to date. And also continue watching TekTalk with Scotty and Tonio, because we'll keep you up to date. We'll keep you abreast of all the latest and greatest news that you need to know, but we'll explain it in a simple way.
Oh, yeah.
So, alrighty. I guess that's about it for this show. If you like our shows, you can click either the PayPal or the Stripe link down in the description and make a donation to support our work. You can also subscribe to ScottiesTech.Info on Substack, or my website, or whatever. So, yeah, that's the news for now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.